I never thought a wooden dock and a 4,000-square-foot lake house could cause so much trouble until I met Margery Wilkins, the self-proclaimed dictator of the Pine Lake Estates Homeowners Association. It all started on a perfect June morning when I was enjoying my coffee on the deck, watching the sunrise cast golden reflections across the water, my own personal slice of paradise that I'd worked my entire life to afford. "Excuse me." "Hello, Mr. Zimmerman." A shrill voice shattered my peaceful moment. I turned to see a woman with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and designer sunglasses marching down my private dock like she owned it. "My name is Brian Zimmerman, and until 6 months ago, I was a corporate attorney in Chicago. After 25 years of 60-hour workweeks, I'd finally purchased my dream retirement property, a stunning lake house in Pine Lake Estates, a picturesque community in northern Michigan. I'd spent my childhood summers here with my grandparents, and returning felt like coming home. "Can I help you?" I asked, setting my coffee down. "I'm Margery Wilkins, president of the Pine Lake HOA." She didn't offer her hand, just stood there with an iPad clutched to her chest like a shield. "There are several urgent matters we need to discuss about your property." I hadn't even finished unpacking all my boxes, and already the HOA was at my doorstep. "What seems to be the problem, Miss Wilkins?" "It's Mrs. Wilkins," she corrected with a tight smile. "And where should I begin? Your dock extends 3 feet further into the lake than regulations permit. Your exterior paint color wasn't approved by the architectural committee, and those bird feeders," she pointed to the 3 cedar feeders my late wife had crafted, "absolutely prohibited." I took a deep breath. I purchased this property as is. The dock has been this length since the 1990s. The house was painted 5 years ago according to the previous owner, and the bird feeders stay. They're special to me. Margery's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Zimmerman, perhaps you don't understand how things work here. The HOA covenant clearly states that all existing structures must be brought into compliance when ownership changes. You've had 6 months. I wasn't informed of any compliance issues during closing," I argued. "Not my problem." She tapped something on her iPad. "You'll receive formal violation notices this afternoon. Each violation accrues a $100 daily fine until rectified." I nearly choked. "That's absurd. That could be hundreds of dollars per day." "Rules are rules, Mr. Zimmerman. Welcome to Pine Lake." She turned to leave but stopped. "Oh, and one more thing. As HOA president, I need a set of keys to your property." "Excuse me." "All homeowners must provide the HOA with emergency access keys. It's in Section 17.3 of the covenant." I crossed my arms. "I most certainly will not be handing over keys to my home." Her face hardened. "The board meeting is Thursday at 7 p.m. I suggest you attend with your keys and a checkbook for those fines." With that, she spun on her heel and marched back down the dock. I spent the rest of the morning fuming, then called my friend Thomas, who'd recommended Pine Lake to me in the first place. "Ah, you've met the Queen of Pine Lake," Thomas said when I described the encounter. "Margery's been terrorizing homeowners for 3 years now. Ever since her husband Gerald became the township supervisor, she thinks she runs the whole county. She wants keys to my house, Tom. Is that even legal? It's in the bylaws, technically, but most people just ignore it. She can't actually force entry without cause. It's more for emergencies, like water leaks that might damage adjacent properties." "I don't have adjacent properties. I'm on 2 acres at the end of the cove." "Look, just go to the meeting Thursday. Take the temperature of the room. Margery's loud, but she's not the entire board." I hung up and spent the afternoon digging through the mountain of closing documents until I found the HOA covenant, 64 pages of fine print that I admittedly had skimmed during closing. Sure enough, there it was in Section 17.3. Homeowners shall provide the association with a current key or means of emergency access to the property. On Thursday evening, I arrived at the Pine Lake Community Center 15 minutes early, surprised to find the parking lot nearly full. Inside, about 40 homeowners milled around, sipping coffee from styrofoam cups. I recognized a few faces from my morning walks but had yet to meet most of my neighbors formally. "First time?" a friendly voice asked. I turned to find a silver-haired man extending his hand. "Frank Donahue. My wife and I have the frame on Eagle Point." "Brian Zimmerman," I replied, shaking his hand. "Bought the old Peterson place on Hickory Cove. Ah, beautiful spot. I hear Margery's already paid you a visit." News traveled fast in small communities. "She has some concerns about my dock, apparently." Frank rolled his eyes. "Join the club. Most of us are here because of Margery's concerns. Last month it was my wind chimes. The month before, the Garcia's vegetable garden was unsightly. She's on a power trip." "Order, please." Margery's voice cut through the chatter as she took her place at the center table, flanked by 4 other board members. "The June meeting of the Pine Lake Estates Homeowners Association will now come to order." The next hour was excruciating. Margery dominated the meeting, pushing through approvals for new landscaping restrictions and a controversial gate installation at the community entrance. The other board members barely spoke, except for a meek treasurer named Harold who presented a budget that seemed to have an awful lot allocated to administrative expenses. Finally, Margery reached the last agenda item: covenant violations. "We have several properties currently in violation," she announced, pulling up a presentation on the projector. "The most egregious is 478 Lakeside Drive, my address." On the screen appeared several photos of my property, clearly taken without my knowledge. Close-ups of my dock, the bird feeders, even a shot through my window showing unpacked moving boxes. Mr. Zimmerman's violations include non-compliant dock length, unapproved exterior color, prohibited wildlife feeders, and failure to provide emergency access keys. The total daily fine is now at $400, accumulating since Monday. I stood up. "Mrs. Wilkins, I'd like to address these claims." She looked annoyed at the interruption. "This isn't a debate, Mr. Zimmerman. This is a notification of violations. I believe I'm entitled to address the board, according to Section 8.2 of the Covenant." I'd done my homework. A slight murmur ran through the room. Margery's eyes narrowed. "You have 2 minutes." I stepped to the front of the room. "Thank you. First, I'd like to know who took these photographs of my property without permission, including shots through my windows, which seems like a violation of privacy." "HOA inspections don't require prior notification," Margery snapped. "On private property? Behind closed gates, I believe they do." I turned to address the room. "I purchased my home 6 months ago and was never informed of any compliance issues during closing. The dock has existed in its current form for over 20 years. The house color was approved by a previous board. And as for keys to my home, I'm a retired attorney, and I have serious concerns about the legality of demanding access to private property without a warrant or emergency situation." A woman in the back called out. "She wanted our keys too. We never gave them." "Order," Margery banged her gavel. "Mr. Zimmerman, your time is up." "One last thing," I continued, ignoring her. "I've reviewed the covenant thoroughly, and while it does mention emergency access, it doesn't specify that physical keys must be provided. In fact, Section 17.3.2 states that means of emergency access is acceptable. I'm happy to provide the board with the phone number of a trusted local contact who has my spare key for genuine emergencies." A low murmur of approval spread through the room. "Unacceptable," Margery declared. "The board requires direct access." One of the quiet board members, a younger woman, finally spoke up. "Actually, Margery, I think his solution satisfies the requirement." Margery shot her a venomous look. "We'll discuss this in executive session." Meeting adjourned. As people filtered out, several neighbors approached to introduce themselves and express solidarity. It seemed I wasn't Margery's only target. "She's out of control," said a woman named Victoria who owned a property across the cove. "Last year she tried to fine me for having a kayak visible from the water. A kayak, on a lake. You should come to our neighborhood cookout tomorrow, her husband added. Lots of folks would love to meet you and commiserate. The next morning, I was having breakfast when I heard a vehicle coming up my long driveway. Through the window, I spotted a Pine Lake maintenance truck. Curious, I stepped onto the porch as a middle-aged man in a uniform approached. Morning, he called. Here to inspect your dock. HOA orders. I wasn't notified of any inspection, he shrugged. Just following instructions. Mrs. Wilkins wants measurements and photos. I'm afraid I'll have to decline. This is private property and you're not entering without my permission or proper notice. The maintenance man looked uncomfortable. Look, I'm just doing my job. Mrs. Wilkins was very clear, I understand, but unless you have a court order or there's an emergency, you're not accessing my dock today. Please let Mrs. Wilkins know she can contact me directly with any concerns. He hesitated, then nodded. Your call, man. But she's not gonna be happy. I'll take my chances. That evening, I attended the neighborhood cookout at the community park. It was exactly what I needed: genuine people, good food, and no HOA drama. I met dozens of neighbors and quickly realized there were two factions in Pine Lake, those who feared Margery and those who were organizing to oppose her. You should run for the board, suggested Rebecca, a retired school principal who lived down the street. We need someone who knows the law and isn't afraid of her. Elections are in September, added her husband James. 3 seats open, including the presidency. I laughed. I retired to avoid politics, not jump into a new battlefield. Just think about it, Rebecca said. Meanwhile, document everything. Margery doesn't play fair. She wasn't wrong. The following morning, I received an official-looking envelope containing violation notices totaling $1,200 in fines, along with a final demand for my house keys within 48 hours or face additional penalties. I called my old law partner, Sylvia, in Chicago. This is fascinating, she said after I explained the situation. HOAs have significant power, but they're not above the law. Send me your covenant and these violation notices. Michigan has some specific statutes about HOA governance that might help. 2 days later, Sylvia called back. Brian, this is better than I thought. Your HOA covenant hasn't been properly updated since 2010, and Michigan law changed in 2014 regarding emergency access provisions. The current covenant language about keys is essentially unenforceable. Also, their fine structure exceeds state-mandated limits. So I can fight this. More than that, you can turn the tables, but first let's send a formal response. I've drafted it for you. The letter Sylvia prepared was a masterpiece of legal precision, citing multiple Michigan statutes and case law that invalidated both the key requirement and the excessive fines. It concluded with a firm but professional request for all violations to be withdrawn within 10 business days. I hand-delivered it to Margery's house that afternoon. Her husband Gerald answered the door, looking surprised to find a stranger on his doorstep. I have a letter for Mrs. Wilkins regarding HOA matters, I explained. Marge, he called over his shoulder. HOA stuff. Margery appeared, her expression souring when she recognized me. Mr. Zimmerman, do you have my keys? Actually, I have this. I handed her the envelope. A formal response to the violation notices prepared by legal counsel. I'd appreciate your prompt attention to these matters. She didn't take it. Whatever this is, it should be submitted through proper channels. Board communications are to be sent to our P.O. box. The covenant specifies that responses to violations may be delivered to the issuing officer directly. That would be you, Mrs. Wilkins. I held the envelope out again. Consider yourself served. Gerald, seemingly curious, took the envelope from my hand. I'll make sure she reads it. I nodded. Thank you, have a pleasant evening. The next week passed quietly, too quietly. I heard nothing from Margery or the board, though neighbors reported seeing her car driving slowly past my property several times. Then came Sunday morning. I was returning from a pre-dawn fishing trip when I noticed something wasn't right. My front door was slightly ajar. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously and pushed it open. Nothing seemed disturbed in the entryway. "Hello," I called out. No response. I moved carefully through the house, fishing rod still in hand as a makeshift weapon. Everything appeared normal until I reached the kitchen, where I found Margery Wilkins rifling through my desk drawer. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded. She jumped, startled, then quickly composed herself. "Mr. Zimmerman, you should be more careful about securing your doors. As HOA president, when I noticed your door open, I had a responsibility to check for water leaks or other hazards. My door was locked when I left this morning." She waved dismissively. "Clearly not. Regardless, this gives you first-hand experience of why we need emergency access." "If I were a burglar, you are a burglar," I interrupted. "You broke into my home. That's criminal trespass, possibly breaking and entering. I'm calling the police." Panic flashed across her face. "That's unnecessary. I'm leaving." She tried to brush past me toward the door, but I blocked her path. "No, you're staying right here until the authorities arrive." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. 15 excruciating minutes later, 2 Pine Lake Township police officers arrived. Margery had composed herself and launched into her version of events before they could even introduce themselves. "Officers, this is all a misunderstanding. As HOA president, I was performing a wellness check after noticing an unsecured door. Mr. Zimmerman is new to our community and doesn't understand our procedures." "That's not what happened," I countered, explaining how I'd found her searching through my desk. The older officer, whose nameplate read Williams, looked between us. "Mrs. Wilkins, did you have permission to enter Mr. Zimmerman's home?" "I have authority as HOA president. That's not what I asked." "Did he give you permission to enter his residence?" She hesitated. "Not explicitly, but our covenant, madam, HOA covenants don't override Michigan trespassing laws." "Let me see your hands, please." What followed was surreal. Margery Wilkins, HOA president and self-appointed queen of Pine Lake Estates, was handcuffed and read her rights in my kitchen. As Officer Williams led her toward the patrol car, his partner stayed behind to take my statement. "How did she get in?" he asked, looking at my intact door lock. That was the question bothering me too. I checked around and discovered a basement window had been jimmied open. "I believe she came in through here," I showed him. The officer photographed the window and took notes. "That changes things. Breaking and entering is a felony." "I just want to understand why she was here," I said. "What was she looking for in my desk? We'll ask her. Meanwhile, you might want to change your locks and check if anything's missing." After the police left with Margery in the back seat of their patrol car, I did a thorough inventory. Nothing seemed to be missing, but when I checked my home office more carefully, I noticed something odd. My HOA files had been disturbed, and the covenant document was missing. I called Sylvia immediately. "She was looking for the evidence," Sylvia concluded after hearing my story. "Your letter scared her. It pointed out that the board has been operating outside the law. If you have documentation proving they knew about the outdated covenant and enforced it anyway, that's serious. HOA board members can be personally liable. But why break in? Why not just deny everything? Because somewhere in those files might be proof that she knew." "Did the previous owner leave you any correspondence with the HOA?" That triggered a memory. Among the closing documents was a file labeled HOA Communications that I'd never thoroughly examined. I dug it out and discovered a goldmine: 3 years of communications between the previous owner and the HOA, including a letter from the owner's attorney challenging the very same key policy, with Margery's signed response acknowledging the legal concerns but dismissing them. "This is exactly what she was looking for," I told Sylvia. "Evidence she knew the key policy was legally questionable but enforced it anyway." "Make copies of everything," Sylvia advised. "And Brian, be careful. Someone willing to break into your home isn't playing by normal rules." The next day, Gerald Wilkins called me. "Mr. Zimmerman, I want to apologize for my wife's behavior. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding." Breaking into my home goes beyond a misunderstanding, Mr. Wilkins. Margery is under a lot of pressure. She's devoted years to this community. The charges against her would ruin our reputation. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? If you decline to press charges, the HOA would immediately drop all violation claims against your property, and Margery would resign from the board. I considered this. I'll think about it, but I'd need more than just dropping my violations. There are serious systemic problems with how this HOA is being run, such as the outdated covenant, excessive fines, selective enforcement, and financial transparency issues. Before I make any decisions, I'd like to see the HOA financial records for the past 3 years. There was a long pause. That's complicated. Those records are only available to board members. Actually, Michigan law gives all homeowners the right to inspect financial records with reasonable notice. I'm giving notice now. Gerald cleared his throat. I'll have to discuss this with our treasurer. You do that. Meanwhile, I have a meeting with the prosecutor's office this afternoon. The call ended abruptly. Word of Margery's arrest spread through Pine Lake like wildfire. By afternoon, my phone was buzzing with text messages from neighbors I'd met at the cookout, offering support and sharing their own HOA horror stories. Rebecca organized an impromptu gathering at her house that evening, which turned into an unofficial community meeting with over 30 homeowners present. "This isn't just about Margery," said Frank Donahue. "The entire board has been enabling her. Did you know our annual dues increased 40% over 3 years with minimal explanation of where the money's going? And the selective enforcement," added Victoria Carson from across the cove. The Thompsons were fined for their fence height, while the same exact fence at the Wilkins rental property on Maple Street was approved without question. "The rental property?" I asked. "Margery and Gerald own 3 rental properties in Pine Lake," explained Rebecca. "All magically exempt from the strict enforcement everyone else faces. This was news to me. That's a clear conflict of interest." "There's more," said James, Rebecca's husband. "The new landscaping company that got the $80,000 community contract last year, owned by Margery's brother." As the stories piled up, a clear picture emerged of an HOA that had become a personal fiefdom for Margery and her allies, using selective enforcement and intimidation to control the community while potentially misappropriating funds. "We need a full audit," I said finally. "And not just of the finances. We need to review every violation, every approval, and every contract for the past 3 years." "Can we legally demand that?" someone asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "Under Michigan law, the HOA must maintain these records and make them available to homeowners. If they refuse, we can petition the court to compel disclosure." "What about Margery?" asked Victoria. "Will she really face charges?" "That's up to the prosecutor, but breaking and entering is serious. At minimum, she'll likely face probation and be barred from serving on the board." "Good," several voices echoed. By the meeting's end, we had formed a homeowners coalition with a clear plan. Demand financial transparency, challenge the validity of the outdated covenant, and push for a special election to replace the entire board. I had somehow become the de facto legal advisor to the coalition, my peaceful retirement now a distant memory. But for the first time since moving to Pine Lake, I felt connected to the community, united with my neighbors against a common adversary. The following day, I received a formal letter from the HOA board minus Margery, who had been temporarily suspended pending the criminal investigation. They requested a meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to recent misunderstandings. I agreed, on the condition that I could bring 2 representatives from our homeowners coalition and that the meeting be recorded. Surprisingly, they consented. The meeting took place in the community center, with Harold the treasurer representing the board alongside 2 other members. Gerald Wilkins was notably absent. "We want to put this unfortunate situation behind us," Harold began nervously. Mrs. Wilkins acted without board authorization when she entered your property. We're prepared to formally rescind all violation notices against you and issue a public apology." "That's a start," I said, "but our concerns go far beyond my personal situation. We have questions about financial management, selective enforcement, and conflicts of interest within the board." Harold shifted uncomfortably. "Those are separate issues that should be addressed at the annual meeting in September." "No," I replied firmly. "These are urgent governance matters that require immediate attention. Our coalition represents over 60 homeowners who demand accountability now, not months from now." After 2 hours of tense negotiation, we reached an agreement. The board would provide complete financial records for independent review, suspend all pending violation proceedings community-wide, and schedule a special election for a new board within 60 days. In return, I would consult with the prosecutor about potential alternatives to criminal prosecution for Margery, such as a diversion program that would require her to perform community service and permanently resign from the board. As we left the meeting, Rebecca squeezed my arm. "You were born for this, Brian. I've never seen the board back down like that." I sighed. "I spent 25 years negotiating with corporate sharks. Sadly, it's a familiar dance." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Our coalition obtained the financial records and discovered what many had suspected: questionable contracts to friends and family of board members, unexplained administrative expenses, and selective enforcement that mysteriously avoided properties connected to Margery's social circle. We also uncovered something more troubling. The HOA had been collecting special assessments for a community dock renovation that never materialized, with over $120,000 unaccounted for. When confronted with these findings, Harold broke down and admitted that Margery had directed him to divert funds to a separate account, which she claimed was for long-term planning, but appeared to have been used for improvements to the Wilkins rental properties. I presented this evidence to the prosecutor, who expanded the investigation to include financial fraud. Gerald Wilkins suddenly announced a long-planned vacation to Florida, though rumors suggested he had actually fled to avoid potential charges. Meanwhile, our coalition prepared for the special election, putting together a slate of respected community members committed to transparency and fairness. I reluctantly agreed to run for the board after numerous neighbors insisted we needed someone with legal expertise. The night before the election, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Margery Wilkins, looking considerably less polished than when we'd first met. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Against my better judgment, I let her step into the foyer, keeping the door open. "I've come to apologize," she said, not meeting my eyes. "What I did was inexcusable." "Yes, it was. I never meant for things to go this far. It started with small compromises, a favor for a friend, bending a rule here and there. Then suddenly I was in too deep and breaking into my home." "Was that just another small compromise?" She shook her head. "I panicked. Your letter threatened everything I'd built. I needed to find anything you might have that could prove I knew about the legal problems with the covenant." "Why are you telling me this now?" "The prosecutor offered me a deal, probation and restitution instead of jail time if I cooperate fully. I've already given a complete statement." She finally looked up at me. "Gerald's gone. Took whatever money was left and disappeared. 27 years of marriage, and he left me to face this alone. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. I'm sorry about that. I deserve it, all of it." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." My formal resignation from the HOA, a personal apology, and information about where some of the missing funds went. Gerald had offshore accounts I didn't know about until recently. I took the envelope cautiously. "This won't make the legal consequences go away." "I know. I'm just trying to do one right thing before I lose everything." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, your dock looks fine the way it is, and those bird feeders, they're beautiful. Your wife had talent." With that, she walked back to her car, a diminished version of the imperious woman who had marched down my dock demanding keys months earlier. The next day, our coalition slate won the special election by a landslide. I found myself elected vice president, serving under Rebecca as our new president. Our first actions were to commission a full professional audit, establish a transparent violation appeal process, and begin the lengthy process of updating the covenant to comply with current Michigan law. The criminal investigation continued, eventually resulting in probation for Margery and an arrest warrant for Gerald, who was eventually located in Costa Rica and extradited to face more serious fraud charges. The missing HOA funds were partially recovered and put toward the long-promised community dock renovation. As summer turned to fall, life at Pine Lake gradually returned to normal. The new board operated with transparency and fairness, and the community began healing from the divisions Margery had created. I found myself busier than I'd planned in retirement, but the work was satisfying in ways my corporate career had never been. One evening in late September, I was sitting on my dock watching the sunset when Frank Donahue pulled up in his pontoon boat. "Evening, Mr. Vice President," he called cheerfully. "Thought you might want to see this." He handed me a photograph of a newly installed community bulletin board at the entrance to Pine Lake Estates. Emblazoned across the top were the words, "A community of neighbors, not rules." "Rebecca's idea," Frank explained. "A reminder of what we're trying to build here." I smiled, thinking of how far we'd come since that first confrontation with Margery. "It's perfect. You know, if you hadn't stood up to her about those keys, we might still be living under her thumb." I shrugged. "Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to go along." "Well, we're all grateful it was you." Frank started his engine again. "Meeting tomorrow at 7, I'll be there." As Frank's boat pulled away, I looked back at my lake house, the dock that was still too long, the bird feeders that were still prohibited, and the exterior color that was still unapproved. But now they were simply features of a home in a community that had remembered its purpose: to bring neighbors together, not to drive them apart. I never did give anyone my house keys, and as it turned out, that was the key to everything else.